So I like to think I'm pretty well versed when it comes to Xbox 360 racing games. You've got your classic exclusives like Forza Motorsport, the early days of Forza Horizon, and sadly, the ending days of Project Gotham Racing. There's numerous generations of Need for Speed games, a couple of Burnout games, and even games like Driver San Francisco, one of my personal favourites. Now, that said, I was in CEX the other day, a game store for secondhand video games, and was browsing the 360 shelves looking just for literally anything that looked kinda cool to pick up and play. And I came across a game called Race Pro, which is, quite a generic title, but I'd never heard of it before. Never seen it before, didn't recognize the cover art, and saw it was from Atari. Now the game was like £3, so naturally I bought it, had to play it, and had to make a video about it. So without further ado, this is Race Pro. So in 2009, Race Pro was launched exclusively on the Xbox 360. As I mentioned, it was published by Atari. The game was developed by Simbin Studios, who had worked on numerous different racing simulators for PC across the years, including the GTR games and also Volvo the game for some reason. And let's be real, the title Race Pro doesn't really tell you much of what it's actually going to be about. It sounds like a placeholder name that should have been changed before the game released, but they kind of just forgot and went, well, Race Pro it is. This is a racing game that had no open world, no car customization, no dramatic storyline, and pretty much no attempt to even make motorsport seem glamorous. Race Pro just hands you a racing car, points you towards the circuit, and just kind of expects you to understand all the concepts behind racing cars, such as brake bias. But because I am quite stupid, I don't understand half of these things, but that did not subtract away from the fact that this game was a lot of fun. So this game's launch should have been a major moment, a respected PC sim developer bringing its expertise to a console audience at a time when proper hardcore sims were still relatively uncommon outside the PC market. Instead, Race Pro was kinda greeted to a mixed response, achieving a Metacritic average of 72, and then quietly disappearing behind other competitors. I mean, hey, as I said, I'd never heard of it. Contemporary reviews generally agreed that the driving was really good, but almost everything surrounding it felt unfinished, outdated, or just incredibly generically boring. So was Race Pro an overlooked simulator that deserved far more attention, or was it simply a very good physics model trapped inside a kind of boring video game? And there's only really one way to find out, and that's by driving. So before we dive into the gameplay, let's just look at a bit of history about the game and of course Simbin themselves. So the studio's games were not designed around collecting hundreds of road cars or gradually turning a Nissan Micra into an intercontinental ballistic missile. Titles such as GTR and Race concentrated on licensed racing championships, realistic handling, authentic circuits, and recreating the experience of driving dedicated competition cars. So for its console debut, Simbin wanted to preserve that identity while making the experience manageable with a 360 controller, which of course really required a new engine which was codenamed Lizard, which was probably better than just transferring the tech used by existing PC releases. Essentially, their goal was to retain realistic behaviour even in powerful cars, but still making them intuitive enough for console players on controller. Interviews have shown that the team also focused heavily on surface detail, attempting to reproduce the bumps and everything that influence how a car behaves around each circuit. Which is important because Race Pro was never intended to be Forza Motorsport with fewer cars. It was effectively a compact collection of Simbin's existing racing disciplines, rebuilt for the 360 and arranged around a more approachable career. The main attraction was the officially licensed World Touring Car Championship, but joined by Formula BMW, Formula 3000, the Mini Challenge, Caterham Racing, Radical Sports Car, several GT categories, and even a small collection of high-performance cars. The main thing is that this is not a collection built around ordinary road cars. Race Pro is all about machinery specifically designed for competition. You begin with relatively manageable vehicles such as the Mini Cooper race cars and gradually move into faster touring cars, GT machinery, lightweight Caterhams Radicals, and open wheel cars capable of punching every lazy input. To be honest, as soon as you get past the minis, every single car in this game is very capable of punishing you, and I learnt that the hard way because oh boy, I loved this game, but I am not good at it. Now, the first thing you really notice about Race Pro is how little interest it has in making any kind of strong first impression. The menus are very simple, they're very flat, and to be honest, dominated by text, which really should be a bit of a turn-off. There's very little music, in fact, pretty much none, very little animation, and almost nothing that communicates the atmosphere surrounding professional motorsport. It feels less like arriving at an international racing championship and more like signing into a piece of software used to organise one. And I'm definitely not alone in that sense, because reading reviews at the time, there were a lot that highlighted this issue. GameSpot described the menus and presentation as sparse, Games Radar thought the entire package looked several years out of date. The bottom line is, a lot of people had the same conclusion. The menus, the presentation, it was all kind of lazy, and if you watch this channel quite a lot, you know I like to focus on the menu design because it's always a good first impression for what's to come. Now, normally I don't mind a racing game getting straight to the point. I don't need a fictional social media feed congratulating me for finishing 11th, because it's just degrading. I do not need 3 presenters explaining that cars become faster when you upgrade the engine, and I definitely do not need to walk around a virtual festival while listening to people describe me as a superstar because I drove through a speed camera. But there is a difference between being focused and feeling, well, unfinished. And Race Pro regularly crosses that line. There's no real celebration when you progress, cars are presented as entries in a database rather than actual desirable machines, and the career lacks the personalities, rivalries, or team management that could have made its licensed championships really feel alive. It captures the mechanics of motorsport, yeah, but it doesn't really capture much of the drama, the theatrics, and this dryness, you know, it extends to the game's name, Race Pro. As I said, this is just not a good title. This is what somebody types onto the box art while waiting for the actual title to be approved. Anyway, maybe I'm being too mean to it, so let's actually get into the game. So, once the race actually begins, the reason that Race Pro still has some dedicated supporters becomes, well, pretty damn obvious. The handling in this game is excellent. Not necessarily because it's brutally difficult, but because the cars communicate so much through what are relatively simple controls. Vehicle weight, downforce, and power delivery create noticeable differences between classes. A Mini feels stable and approachable and a good first entry racing car. Touring cars encourage close racing. Caterhams are light and lively and, to be honest, love to spin, and while the faster open wheel and GT machinery demand far more discipline. There's just so much distinction between different vehicles, and I love that in a racing game. It actually makes each class feel so much different, because that's always a nerve going in. Oh, we have all these different racing classes, but all of them except maybe the Caterham and Formula all feel the same. But no, that is definitely not the case here. This is a game that feels serious, while somehow still being kind of accessible. So there are 3 main difficulty presets: Novice, Semi-Pro, and Pro. These alter assists include braking help, traction control, anti-lock brakes, and the racing line, but individual settings can also be adjusted separately. The default professional setting removes much of the assistance, although the game allows you to reintroduce specific aids later, rather than forcing you into one rigid configuration. Higher difficulties also increase the amount of credits earned, creating an incentive to gradually remove support as you improve. If I were you, I would just go in and turn all the assists off straight away, because it makes for a far more interesting and entertaining experience. Yeah, sure, pretty much every race I had to restart at least once because I crashed so badly I couldn't come back from it, but you learn from it, and it's also quite entertaining to watch. That to me is one of Race Pro's smartest decisions. A less experienced player can begin with the racing line and any kind of assistance they want, and then reduce each setting once they get used to the car. It doesn't treat accessibility as the opposite of simulation, it treats it more as a route towards getting that simulation, which is really cool. One thing I will say though is driving aggressively rarely ever works. You definitely can't throw the car into every corner, bounce off another driver like it's online Forza Horizon, and continue as though nothing happened. Braking too late unsettles the whole thing, locking the wheels compromises steering, and accelerating carelessly can just send more powerful cars into a spin. The game rewards, well, smooth operators. Brake in a straight line, release the pressure as the car turns, balance the throttle through the corner, and don't treat a curb like a launch ramp, and you will probably be fine. Once it starts to click, Race Pro, it becomes incredibly satisfying to play. Some of the best moments you'll experience in the game might not even be overtakes or victories, it just might be those moments where you just flow into every corner and don't have any problems. You position the car correctly on entry, clip the apex, feel the weight transfer, and accelerate onto the straight without needing any correction. Don't get me wrong, it's not spectacular in the way that Grid is spectacular, you know, there's no slow-mo camera or commentator screaming because I've done something right. It just feels right, and that, to be fair for this game, feels like enough. Now, whilst this was of course built for console, there's definitely still an aura of, oh, this was kind of meant for steering wheels. But it still remains kind of effective on a controller. It includes settings for steering sensitivity and dead zones, along with separate adjustments for the throttle and brakes. Car setups and control profiles can also be saved, allowing players with more complicated wheel equipment to refine everything to your preference. Using an analog stick naturally limits how precisely you can control steering, especially with faster cars. Small corrections can become awkward, and it's easy to move from not steering enough to turning too sharply. However, the default setups generally lean towards manageable understeer. During development, Simbin deliberately tuned cars to be less nervous when first selected, leaving more experienced players free to adjust them later. As a result, this is not a sim where playing with a controller feels like attempting surgery while wearing boxing gloves. There is a learning curve, don't get me wrong, but the game is entirely playable. The greater problem today, to be honest, is hardware preservation. The game never joined the Xbox backward compatibility program, so you can't officially play it on anything other than your original Xbox 360 hardware, which makes it a little bit more awkward. Alright, so let's focus on the career mode, because that's divided into 8 tiers and contains 33 racing contracts. Each contract represents a team or championship. To enter, you can complete a qualifying test by beating a target lap and then paying a smaller entry fee, or if you're really lazy, you can avoid the test and purchase the contract outright for a lot more money. It's a clever system, don't get me wrong, players with enough skill can prove themselves and save money, while anyone struggling with a particular target can continue progressing by paying the higher price. To be honest, half of the lap times they're asking you to achieve are just not difficult anyway, so you're far better off just trying to do that and get used to the car before you enter the actual races. But if you are struggling, it does prevent that struggle from completely blocking the career mode. The contracts gradually introduce more demanding vehicles, beginning with the slower categories obviously, before opening the faster GT and single-seater championships. Completing events earns credits and unlocks cars for use in other modes. Increasing the difficulty or reducing assist improves the payout, so there's always reason to challenge yourself. Unfortunately, the structure surrounding these ideas is, how do I put this nicely, very repetitive. You select a contract, complete the qualification test, run a small championship with like 3 races, each consisting of 2 laps, and then move on to the next contract. There are no meaningful decisions outside choosing which branch to follow. There's no team development, vehicle ownership, rivalry system, and little sense that you're actually building a career. One contract feels much like another. The cars become faster, the events become harder, but the presentation barely reacts. Like, I don't know, mechanically the career, you know, it works, but emotionally it's almost completely empty. Winning a championship should feel important in a game, but in Race Pro it just feels like completing a row of a spreadsheet. The career really is best treated as an extended tour of the game's vehicles rather than a compelling motorsport journey. It introduces each class, teaches the circuits, and encourages you to gradually remove the assists. Once you've unlocked everything, the championship and multiplayer modes are probably the real reason to continue. So the NPC drivers in this game can actually create genuinely close racing. Opponents run in compact groups, defend their position, and take advantage of mistakes, and because the handling demands restraint, simply charging through the pack is rarely successful. However, I will say, they always have really terrible launches at the start of races, so very often you can just fly off straight away, so if you don't really make any mistakes, you can hold first position. But if you do, they will take advantage of it. However, I will say their awareness is a bit inconsistent. Sometimes they produce really convincing races, while sometimes they seem completely unaware of you and cause avoidable contact. Collision detection is also really weird in this game. Sometimes cars just clip together or suddenly separate after an impact, and the feeling of an impact in this game is just not dramatic at all. It doesn't feel like you've crashed. Sometimes I wasn't even aware I'd made contact with a car on my left or right or even behind, because the audio cue from it is just not strong and there's barely any physical feedback. Take Need for Speed Shift for example. It's not my favourite racing game ever, but when you crash, oh my god, it was so dramatic and it really made you feel like you'd made a mistake during motorsport. Here it's just kind of like, oh well, keep going, you'll be fine. But when it does work, it really does work. Race Pro is at its best when everything and everyone behaves. The issue is persuading everyone to behave. So let's talk about the visuals, because Race Pro was never really an attractive 360 game, even back in 2009. The car models themselves are respectable, they're pretty good from the cockpit, functional interiors and recognizable details, and the lighting occasionally produces a convincing image, but everything beyond the vehicle is not quite as good. Circuit environments are pretty basic, the textures, to me, are quite grainy, and shadows are visibly jagged, and the game does suffer from some quite annoying screen tear. The visual simplicity would be easier to forgive if performance were at least flawless, but it's not. The frame rate is generally playable, but tearing and occasional instability undermine the precision that a sim depends upon. This is where Race Pro's new engine feels less like a confident console debut and more like technology that probably needed a couple of extra months of development. It's not ugly because it prioritizes simulation, it's just ugly because it's ugly. There's no real defense I can think of for it. However, the vehicle audio is much stronger than the visuals. They used recordings and data from real racing cars, and the different classes have noticeably different personalities. And the cockpit view is where the audio works best. Engine note, tyre noise, and gear changes provide important info about what your car is doing. You begin to recognise when the tyres are approaching their limit or the engine is ready for another gear without constantly checking the display. Outside the races, there is almost nothing. There's no music, and don't get me wrong, it's a simulator, it doesn't really need a playlist when you're actually racing, but like I mentioned before, the collision sounds are pretty much non-existent. That's my one complaint with the sound design. Collisions just don't feel good. So let's quickly talk about the multiplayer, because the online multiplayer supported up to 12 players with extensive options allowing hosts to adjust race rules, assists, weather, and vehicle restrictions. That's pretty damn good. Unfortunately, I can't actually test this because the servers have long since shut down, but I'll just take their word for it. However, I will say the absence of traditional split-screen multiplayer is kind of disappointing. It includes this mode called Hot Seat Mode, where you take turns driving rather than racing simultaneously. In co-op events, multiple people share the same car, exchanging control after a set number of laps or a chosen length of time. In the competitive version, each person controls a different vehicle while the AI takes over between turns. It's an unusual idea, but to me it's just a system that sounds like it was made because the devs couldn't get split screen working. Passing the controller during a race creates pressure and can be entertaining, but it's not really a good replacement for actual racing. It just seems a bit weird to me because games that graphically were a lot nicer, like Project Gotham Racing 3 and 4, could handle split screen, and don't get me wrong, they had their moments where the games lagged, but they still managed. This game is nowhere near as pretty as those, and I don't understand how they couldn't have got that working. So in terms of critical response, Race Pro, as we covered earlier, holds a 72 out of 100 on Metacritic. The user score is very close to that with a 7.1 out of 10. It is an impressive game with an impressive handling model, just wrapped in a kind of boring package. Now in terms of sales figures, this definitely was not a smash hit on the 360. It sold a at least somewhat respectable 170,000 copies, and that's according to VG Charts, but I don't think this was the smash hit that Atari was hoping it would be. So to me, Race Pro is definitely one of the more interesting racing games on the console. It's not one of the most best complete packages on there. In fact, it clearly isn't. The career is repetitive, the menus are lifeless, and the visuals were dated even at release. The AI can be clumsy, but the handling, well, it's just so good. Every class has a distinct personality, the controls reward precision, and the circuits reward practice. And there are moments when Race Pro delivers exactly what its title promises, no distractions or nonsense, just racing. The problem is that even a serious sim needs enough structure and atmosphere to make that feel important. It's built the foundation for an excellent console sim series, and then it just kind of disappeared. So it just occupies this strange place in Xbox history. It's too rough to stand alongside the more polished racing games of its generation, but too mechanically awesome to dismiss as another forgotten release. So Race Pro isn't like some hidden masterpiece, but it definitely is a hidden driving model, and a very good one at that. So that brings us to the end of our look at Race Pro for the Xbox 360. What do you guys think of this game? If you played it, are you going to go pick it up because it's pretty cheap to get, and it's honestly quite a fun time? Share all your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support. You guys are awesome, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.